Hello, Tom Levecki here with a special edition of Mobsters Inc. in collaboration with the Armchair MBA. With that being said, we talk about a lot of different wise guys, we talk a lot of different guys in the life, if you will. There's kind of a prolific guy that we don't talk about enough, and we're going to talk about him today with a very special best-selling author and former prosecutor, Vecchione. We're going to be talking about Luigi the Zip today on Mobsters Inc. Before we start, shout out to JSV Capital, the show's sponsor, dropping a link below. He's starting his mentorship course. Well, not starting, he's been doing it a while, but his revamped mentorship course. You can sell loans, you can sell real estate loans, business loans, and so forth, all through the JSV mentorship program. All right, guys, I'm excited about this one, and you should be equally excited. So this author, best-selling author that I'm about to introduce, former Brooklyn prosecutor. This guy's done everything under the sun in Brooklyn born and raised. Michael Vecchione, author extraordinaire. Welcome to the Mobsters Inc. podcast. How you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing well, Tom. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure and an honor. Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you. And to all of your listeners and viewers, hello. It's good to be here.
God bless. Now, I want to jump in, but before we do, obviously today we're going to be talking about, I'm going to drop a link below. We're going to talk about Homicide Is My Business, Luigi the Zip, Hitman's Quest for Honor. But before we get into that, Michael, you wrote a few other books. Why don't you give a little bit of a background about some of the books you wrote and so a little bit about your prosecutorial experience as well.
Absolutely. The first one I did was, and I did it in conjunction with a detective who worked on the case with me. It's called Friends of the Family, and it's about the Mafia cops case involving two detectives, Eppolito and Caracappa. That was my case, and Tommy Dades, the detective who brought it to me, and he and I had worked on many cases, and he had the investigation into the death of one of the brothers who was wrapped up in the case, and got to know Betty Heidel, who was the mother of one of them, and she one day, completely out of the blue, said, there's something I need to tell you. And she told them all about Caracappa and Eppolito coming to visit her, looking for her son, Jimmy, because Gaspipe Casso, who was the underboss of the Lucchese family at the time, was looking for him. Lucchese had been, Casso had been shot at. They attempted to kill him, and he wanted to know who was part of the group that did that. And Heidel was one of them. And the mob cops brought Heidel to Casso. He tortured him until he got the names of the others, and then he killed him. And Betty Heidel came to, or had Tommy Dades come to her home and said, "Listen, I never told you about this." And she told him about the visit, and she held it back, and she said to him, "I hope that makes a difference in terms of whether or not you can get these guys." Now, Tom, this is 10 years after the incident occurred, and Tommy came to me, walked into my office one afternoon, and said, "I think we can get Eppolito and Caracappa. You interested?" So, of course, that was it. And the result was the Fed stealing the case from us.
That's what they do.
Yeah, par for the course. But we were able to write the book. We wrote. It's called Friends of the Family, and quite frankly, we just optioned it again. I mean, I've optioned that book about 4 times to Hollywood, and we just optioned it again. And I got my fingers crossed that ultimately it'll be on TV they're looking to do a 6 or 8 part series on a streaming channel. So that's the first one. Next one was
wait, hold on, because there's a little bit to unpack there, and I do have a little bit of knowledge of some of the situation there.
Sure.
So, do you believe that Casso called Danny Marino for the okay to kill him?
Called Danny Marino to kill him?
Yeah, because Heidel was allegedly Danny Marino's nephew, and he called Jimmy Fiella and another captain over.
No, I don't believe that at all.
Yeah, because I don't buy that. Suppose he called
absolutely
Danny
not.
Marino up and said, "Hey, you know, he did this. Can we kill him as a courtesy because he was a
No.
fellow capo at the time? And
No, that didn't happen. As soon as he found out that that Jimmy Heidel was one of the people who was in that car who shot him, that was it. He gave it to his, what he called them, his crystal ball.
yeah,
The cops, and you know, and there was another guy who they killed, they killed the wrong person, named Nicky Guido.
yes, the bagel shop kid, right?
Yeah, correct. And he was showing off his brand new car on Christmas morning to his uncle when a car pulled up next to him and shot and killed him. He jumped, actually, Tom, he jumped in front of his uncle and on top of him, so his uncle didn't get killed, and Nicky got killed. The real Nicky Guido had heard about all of this and took off for California. He later came in and became an informant. So that was another guy. But no, Gaspipe didn't need anybody's permission. He was a man of him, you know, into himself, and did what he wanted. And Jimmy, you know, Jimmy was unfortunate. You know, I got to tell you one little thing about that. We found out through another source, and I don't remember exactly what the source was, the house that that Jimmy Heidel was tortured in the basement. And Tommy Dades, not using the police department's forensic unit, we used a forensic unit from Bellevue Hospital, of all places, because we were uncertain as to how and who in the PD were friends with Caracappa and Ippolito. So we used this other group, and they went to the house, and you're going to get a kick out of this being an Italian American. They went down to the basement, and the entire place was mirrored. They had put mirrors up throughout the entire basement, and the floor was all brand new. So Tommy calls me from the place, and he says, "Mike, this place is all mirrored. We'd have to destroy this house in order to look for the blood, Jimmy Heidel's blood, which is what we were looking for."
Yeah.
So that was one of the little things that happened during the course of the investigation.
One more. Sorry to cut you off. One more quick thing on Max. I know we got a lot to talk about. I always wondered about those guys, like the beat that they were on. Were they OC? Were they like? I was wondering because they would go to like all these different places. They were out of place. They were a crystal ball. I understood all that, but were they doing stuff like congruent with their job? So as a prosecutor, like, oh, that makes sense. Or were they on like a totally different beat, and they were just like dumb and doing things they shouldn't have been doing because it wasn't like their coverage area, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does make sense. Ippolito was a precinct detective, so he wasn't involved in an organized crime aspect of it. Caracappa was part of the major case squad and the organized crime section of the major case squad. And here's where your question is very prescient, because this is what happened. The way that we broke the case was we had gotten all of the files from the federal government at the time, because they weren't interested in doing this at that point. We got it, and we set Tommy. I set Tommy Dades up in a room in our office upstairs from my office with all of these boxes. And one day he comes walking into my office with a piece of paper, and he says, "We got him." So what are you talking about? Yeah. What Tommy found was the computer printout that Caracappa did or generated when he searched for Nicky Guido's address and name. And what he found was the wrong Nicky Guido, the guy that they killed. He found his address, his name, and that gave us the link that we needed between these guys and at least the Nicky Guido homicide. So that was, and he did that on a police computer. He did it in the major case squad, and the computer printout was preserved, and we had it. And Tommy, that's how we really started the investigation off on a strong footing. So yeah, and Caracappa also was not the Caracappa had been in trouble before when he first, he had a record when he became a cop. Yeah, he'd been arrested and that was at the time when he became a police officer. It was during the Vietnam War. There were a lot of people there were no recruits, so they were taking anybody. And Caracappa was one of the people that they took, in spite of the fact that he had a criminal record. So
interesting. So that's a biggie. What are some of their books before we get to
Yeah, the other one, the one that we did next is my writing partner Jerry Schmetterer, who has since died. He died of cancer before Homicide Is My Business came out. But when we both, he worked at the DA's office. He was the chief spokesman for the DA, and of course I had the rackets division at the time, and we had all the big cases. So Jerry was setting up press conferences, and I got to know him very well. And I did for, I would say, probably a 6-year period. I did a corruption investigation involving 3 Supreme Court judges. Actually, 3 Supreme Court judges. All of them went to jail. I did the head of the Democratic Party in Brooklyn, another assembly person, the 2 mafia cops, all of this during the same period, this like 6 or 7 period of time, period of time. So Jerry said to me one day over lunch, he said, Mike, when we leave here, we got to do a book about this because this is terrific. And the book, we wrote the proposal, went to St. Martin's Press.
Yeah, St. Martin's.
Sat down with a guy named Tom Dunn and pitched it. And the name of the book was at the time Rackets Chief. It was going to be about my years in the Rackets division. When Tom took the book and they optioned it, they changed the name. They changed the name to Crooked Brooklyn, which was perfect. And because there was one other case that in there that wasn't a mob case, but it was a case that made international news. There was a dentist in Brooklyn who was a dental surgeon. Michael Mastro Marino. Who
I know his ex-wife, Barbara.
Yeah,
very well.
Okay. Well, I got to tell you a little story about Barbara in a second. So that case, he was stealing body parts from cadavers because he had lost his dental license.
Yep.
He was a drug addicted. He had become addicted to Demerol. He lost his license. Was living the high life and needed money to continue living that way. And he started this body, what I call body snatching. It wasn't really body snatching, but what he did is he made deals with funeral directors, and they tipped them off to dead bodies, and he went with his crew, and they took bone and tissue and all kinds of stuff. So,
and real quick for everybody watching, I'm super familiar with that case. So imagine you go to visit, a loved one, go to say your buys, go to say respects, especially Italian Americans were like, would take me instead, and like the legging is a PVC pipe, not bone, not like skin. They would just take whatever, and there is an appropriate vehicle to donate, your organs or donate your skin or donate your bone. But one, you have to opt in, and then number 2, they need to test it. Our man Mastrioni, or whatever his name was, something like that, he just kind of neglected to do that. But anyway, keep going.
Mastro Marino was his name.
Mastro Marino, correct.
Yeah, and he was taking bone from anybody and everybody, and it didn't make a difference if they had died of communicable diseases,
correct,
or if they were 90 years old. And the way that the thing kind of broke open and hit the press was Alistair Cook, who was the Masterpiece Theater master of ceremonies. His daughter. We found out through our search of the records that Alistair Cook was one of the bodies that he ravaged.
Really?
And, and when we went to his daughter to talk about it, to see if she had given permission for them to do this, she was horrified by it. Yeah. And when we told her what was going on, she said, something? When I had my father cremated, and when we spread his ashes, I was expecting little bits of bone and things of that nature. It was like talcum powder. And the reason for that was because there was no bone. They had taken all of the bones. But Tom, this is a guy who was in his 90s. Could you imagine getting a bone transplant of a guy who's in his 90s? But Mastro Marino did it, and he made a lot of money.
I was wondering about, and I'm going to be that guy for a second. You know what I mean? I heard the name. I followed up on his case. I know Barbara pretty well. I knew her pretty well. She was on Oprah and everything too. We'll get to that in a second.
Oh yeah.
He mobbed up. I always kind of felt there might have been, not that the mob was involved with this caper, but I always kind of felt he had OC ties.
Well, the only OC ties that I know about is that he bought, the way that we got the case is that a funeral company, if you want to call it that. They ran funeral homes in different parts of the country, bought a funeral home in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn.
Okay.
And the guy that owned the who they bought it from, was rumors that he had mob ties. And the reason they thought that is that he had been selling prepaid funerals. So he had been building up a big war chest, $300,000 worth of these funerals.
Yeah.
When these new people bought the place and got the books and looked at his bank records and everything, none of that money was around any longer. And the theory was that he had mob ties and he owed money to the mob, and that's correct. And you know what happens to him, Tom? You're not going to believe this.
Oh, no.
While the case was pending and after he had been arrested, because he was a guy who I don't think anybody really trusted, who was a bad guy, thinking in terms of whether or not he would talk. He was up on a roof doing some work in his house, and he allegedly fell off the roof and really hurt himself. And so, I'll leave it to you. Did he have mob ties or not? But we never were able to prove that. And you know what? For our purposes, it didn't make a difference.
And it gets bet. I don't want to wish anything bad on anybody, but I'll say it's apropos. You know how Michael died, right? How the dentist died?
I certainly do. Absolutely.
So guys, this is why you don't do crime.
Yep.
Tell him how he died. It's so apropos, respectfully.
He was stealing bones. He died of bone cancer.
Yep.
So let me tell you the little story about Barbara. I was asked to go to do a TV show.
Yeah.
Something like, I didn't know who I married, or I married a
mobster,
or
monster or something.
Yeah, something of that nature. Yeah. So I had to go to the studio in Lower Manhattan. It was in the back of a building. I go into the back and I walk in, and there's a woman sitting there in what was supposed to be the green room, the waiting room for.
Yeah.
So I look at her, and I didn't recognize her. And she looked at me and she says, "You're Mike Vecchione, aren't you?" I said, "Yeah, why?" She said, "I'm Barbara Mastro." She had changed her name to Mastro Marino. I said, I'm Michael's wife. Now, I had been in and out of the courtroom with the case many times, but I didn't pay attention, to her. And I said, "Well, you here for this?" She says, "Yeah." She said, "But do me a favor, please. When my son, who's in now being taped, please don't tell him if you run across each other who you are, because he's very, very angry at what happened to his father, and I don't trust him in terms of what he might do." I said, "Okay." We never crossed paths. She went in and I went in. So that was my one and only. She did do one thing. I tell you one thing she did do.
Yeah.
She waited. Her son came out and must have gone out another way. She waited. I was going to be before her, and I went in. I came out from the taping, and she said to me, "I have to do something before you leave." I said, "What's that?" She says, "I have to thank you." I said, "Thank me." She said, "I had no idea who my husband was, what he was, and you guys brought that to my attention, and it changed my entire life." So I remember that, and so. How's she doing, by the way?
I probably about 10 years ago knew her very well. Probably saw her. She came to my store one time around this time of year. I want to say about 8 years ago. But I do have friends of friends. I'm gonna follow up, and I'll let her know. Like you say hello, and I'll check in to see how she's doing. When I was friends with her, me being me, I'm like, because you know this. He did really well for himself. So what we call him a dentist. He was a dentist, but he was an oral maxillofacial surgeon.
Absolutely.
The guy was a real deal. So it's not even like splitting hairs. This guy was a surgeon. So like when we call him a dentist, it just simplifies it. But he's an oral maxillofacial surgeon, very accomplished. Again, he lost his license or had some challenges. Always did well for himself, even if he followed the straight and narrow. But when he started doing this, remember, it's all gross profit, right?
Without a doubt.
They were making a lot of money. So I'm like, "Barbara, come on, man. Like, lived in wherever they lived. He had a lot of money. He's like, listen, he was a doctor. I think legitimately she didn't know, but where what tipped me off a little bit, I was like, come on, Barbara, what do you think it was like? What was in your house? She goes, well, we had these big freezers. She goes, the only thing I thought was weird was there was locks on the freezer.
Yeah, there were freezers when we raided his
There were
garage.
locks on them. I said, you don't put locks on free. Granted,
Right.
maybe you don't want the kid to open up and see a guy's head. I get that, but
They
there
were-
might be locks on every freezer. Like
Right.
I just, but I believe she wasn't involved. I'm just saying, like, hindsight's 2020. But if I do remember correctly, wasn't Philly Feds also in on that case? So I remember she was like telling me she was dealing a lot with the Feds in Philly, I believe, out of Philly.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. In Philly, we were able to find that he had an expanded network. Philly was one of the places, Rochester, New York, and there may have been one other place. But you know what we discovered at one point towards the end of the investigation, he had cut a deal with a Russian prison to take the cadavers or dead when prisoners died and transport them to Germany, where he would do the taking of the bones, etc. So, and he had cut a deal with an old aged home in Manhattan, a Jewish old age home, and they were going to get tipped. He was going to get tipped off the bodies at that location as well. So, but yeah, he did get into trouble in Philadelphia. So
we can make this shit up, and we could probably do a whole separate show on that. All right, well let's get into Luigi, because this is
good.
That I came across Luigi myself, not personally, but when I first read about him in Claire Sterling's book, he's a Sicilian-born mobster. The book is Homicide Is My Business. Give us a little bit of background about our friend Luigi.
So Luigi Ronsisvalle, born in Catania, Sicily.
Beautiful.
And he, the way that I characterize him in terms of what he was, is from a statement that he made when he testified in front of Congress, in front of Ronald Reagan's Commission on Organized Crime.
Yeah.
He said to a senator, in America, young boys want to be love baseball.
Yep.
In Sicily, young boys want to be mafia.
Yes.
That was Ronsisvalle. He wanted to become a made man in the worst way. And he couldn't get in to see the main man in Catania, a guy named Rapisardi.
Yeah.
And he tried and he tried and he tried, and he would show up at Rapisardi's coffee shop, and Rapisardi always had a bodyguard there, and they kept him away until one day we got through, and he started talking to Rapisardi, told him about it, and he was a homegrown guy. He was a guy from Catania. Working on the railroad, believe it or not, in Sicily. That's what he was doing. And he convinced Rapisardi to give him some of the menial jobs, collecting for debts from, gamblers or loan shark debts, etc. And he did a good job. And Rapisardi was impressed by him. And then one day Rapisardi had felt that, you're going to graduate. And he gave him his first hit, but it wasn't in Sicily. It was in Milan, Italy. And Luigi had never really traveled that kind of, that way. Came from a small, that Catania is not a big city, but he was lived a life of a kind of a ordinary guy. So he had to figure out how he's going to get to Milan and when he gets there, how to find the guy that he was looking to kill. And he does it. He tells me about the trip from Catania across the Adriatic to Naples, where he got off in Naples or there in around Naples. And then he had to take the train from that area up to Milan. And then he did a little research. And this is what he did for I would say, just about every hit that we talk about and that he talked about. He learned that the preparation, surveillance, and doing that kind of, I would call it grunt work, but spade work, paid off for him. So he was able to find the mark, the guy that he needed to kill, and the guy was a businessman in Milan, and he owed money to Rapisardi. And generally, wise guys don't kill people who owe them money.
Correct.
But this was a message had to be sent to other people who owed him money.
Well, that's
That's the way it worked. And Luigi found him, stalked him. When I say stalk, I mean surveilled him, until one day he was able to get him when he was coming out of his home, waited till he got to a quiet spot and killed him, shot him and killed him. He then does the reverse. He gets back on the train, goes to Naples, gets on the ferry back to Catania, and he goes to see Rapisardi the next day. And Rapisardi has a present for him. It's the Italian newspapers, in which the reporting of this killing of this businessman in Milan was a big section of the newspaper. Luigi was thrilled. He felt that was the beginning of him getting to become the made man. Rapisardi gives him another one in Rome. He gives him another one in Sicily. I mean, he does a lot of them now in around Sicily. He also does one for himself, and this is an unusual thing. As long as I knew him, and as many times I've talked to him, his thing was, Mike, the people who I killed, who died, deserve to die. That was the one thing.
Yeah.
And two, I didn't kill them. The people who paid me to kill them, they were the people who killed him. That was his mantra.
Okay.
So every one of the homicides, with the exception of one I'm going to tell you about in Italy or Sicily, was at the behest of Rapisardi. And in his mind, if you owed this man money, you were dishonorable, so you deserve to die. That was his mantra.
Interesting.
This one was, I told you he worked on a railroad.
Yeah.
One he had an issue or a problem with one of his co-workers. And the co-worker was bad-mouthing him. And that was the kiss of death.
Yeah.
Again, dishonoring. Instead of dealing with him man to man, he was spreading rumors about him and doing things that Luigi felt were dishonorable. And Luigi killed him. And that was the only one in Sicily and or Italy that was done for himself.
On himself.
So what happened?
Why did he come to America?
I'm about to get to that.
Yeah.
So he tells me that one day, he decides that he's not getting anywhere. He's not getting made. And he goes to Rapisardi and he says, Signore, I want to, when are you going to make me a man of honor? that was what they called it.
Yeah. Only
Yeah. And Rapisardi basically tells him, you have to be patient, but I don't know. And he kept putting him off. Finally, Rapisardi says to him during one of these conversations, you need to go to Brooklyn. And I'll tell you why in a second. He said, because they're looking for people like you, and the American mafia, you'll get made faster than you would here in Sicily.
That's probably true. My discussions and research and experience has been, and I don't think it changed too much. Although mafia is more prevalent in Italy, it's hard to get your butt in. That's why I think there was offshoot groups like Listida and other groups that formed, because I think it was really hard to get your butt in. And another part is, as I understand, and I should have asked this earlier, he didn't come from mafia heritage, correct?
Correct. His father was just a working guy, and there's another factor. Yeah. He was from Catania. The mafia in Sicily, the headquarters is in Palermo. Yeah. The Catania mafia was kind of an offshoot of the main mafia in Sicily.
Yep.
So the reason he comes to Brooklyn is that Rapisardi knows that what has been set up, and that is by Joe Bonanno and Carmine Galante, had set up this heroin network with the Sicilian Mafia to import drugs through what was going to ultimately turn out to be the French Connection, through France and then into Brooklyn.
Yeah, this is before the Pizza Connection.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And when this was set up, Galante and Bonanno knew that, and they were not going to share the profits with the other four families. They knew it was going to be a problem when they found out. So they needed gunmen. They needed people to come over and be their henchmen and the Sicilian Zips. That's where this whole thing comes from. The Sicilians sent all of these guys over. I'm sorry. The Sicilian guys came over knowing that there was work for them in America.
Interesting.
And Luigi was one of those people. What he does ultimately, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say ultimately, but as part of his work in Brooklyn, when he finally gets here, is he partners with a guy who they both transport phony and forged passports
to get
from Brooklyn to Canada.
Yeah.
The two of them had real passports, because Luigi comes to America on a legitimate passport. Yeah. So they were able to get into Canada legitimately. They would then meet up with all these Sicilian guys who were in Sicily, in Canada, waiting, and they would give them the passports, and then they would come in themselves. So that was one of the things that he had done. But Tom, the thing is that with Luigi, when he comes to Brooklyn, he faces a similar problem. He's told to go to Knickerbocker Avenue, to Bonanno, which is the center of the Bonanno family at that point.
Yes.
In Brooklyn. And he tells, and Rapasardi says, use my name. And he does. He goes to a coffee shop or a social club in Brooklyn, and he speaks to some guy. He didn't even know who the guy was. He just somebody, and the guy says to him, "What are you doing here?" And he drops Rapasardi's name. And the guy didn't know Rapasardi from a hole in the wall. So he realized that, maybe this is not the person I should speak to. Mm. He tells me that he goes back and he sees somebody now sitting in another day. He sees someone sitting in the club dressed to the nines, Tom. He was dressed, great suit, tie, shoes, very important to Luigi. What shoes he wore. That was a big thing for him.
Yep.
And he said, Mike, I knew that was the guy I had to speak to. And it turns out the guy's name was Pino DeQuana.
Yeah.
DeQuana was sort of the underboss, if you want to call it that, to a guy named Peter Licata, who was the guy who ran Knickerbocker Avenue for the Bonannos. So he finally he walks over to DeQuana, who's reading the Italian paper, drinking. I always forget what the drink was. I don't remember if it was an espresso or a Sambuca. I don't remember.
Yeah.
And he offers to buy him another one. And basically DeQuana says, I don't need that. Who are you? And he drops Rapasardi's name, doesn't pay any attention.
Interesting.
He continues. He's on a mission now. And finally DeQuana agrees to talk to him. And what does DeQuana do? The same thing Rapasardi did in Sicily. He gives him the grunt work, the collecting money, collecting debts, that kind of crap.
Interesting.
And he does a great job. DeQuana, and I have to tell you this story because it's very important, I think, to learn about Luigi's mentality. He sets him up with a guy who was a member, one of these kind of hanger-ons, a guy named Paolo Laporta.
Yeah.
Okay? And Laporta becomes jealous of Luigi because Luigi's kind of stepping into Laporta's business now, his little role, but the bosses want them to work together.
Yeah.
So Laporta tells him
out of Philly, I think, right?
Laporta?
Yeah.
No, he was, as far as I know, he was a Brooklyn guy. He
Avenue guy. Okay.
Maybe a different guy.
Yeah.
So he tells Luigi, I'm going to show you the ropes. I'm going to tell you, who we're going to hit, who we're going to collect money from, etc. One day he tells him, look, there's a guy who owns a drugstore in another part of Brooklyn. He owes money to Licata. We got to go collect from him. And what we're going to do, because he's going to give us a hard time, is you're going to rob him. Here's a gun. I'm going to sit in my car outside. You go in, announce the robbery, steal the money, and then I'll be waiting for you and we'll take off. Okay. That was how they were going to collect this debt from this guy, according to Laporta. Yeah. Well, Luigi walks in, announces the robbery, and the druggist who they were supposed to rob reaches under the counter and takes out an automatic and starts shooting at Luigi. He says to me, Mike, it's a good thing this guy was a bad shot because I was a dead man.
Got him in the leg, right?
No, he doesn't get hit. He doesn't get hit. He runs out to the car, and Laporta has gone. It was a setup. The whole thing was a setup. It was a setup. They would, and Luigi is fuming now. Fuming. He says, "I make my way back to Knickerbocker Avenue. I go to the club, and I speak to DeQuana. I tell him I want to kill Laporta because of what he did to me." And this was the mentality. He was dishonored again, Tom. That was his. That was his thing. It happened in Italy. Now it happened here. He's supposed to be honored. He's supposed to be respected.
Yeah.
What happens is they quash it. Yeah. There's a meeting that night, and what Laporta does to make amends is he gives Luigi half of what Luigi thought the amount was going to be that they were stealing. That was his way of taking
probably some bullshit amount.
Correct. Like so he learns, but that becomes kind of like a watershed moment because they became really good pals. And he tells him, there's another story that's funny as well. He tells Luigi, "Meet me tonight, Knickerbocker Avenue." This is like 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock. Yeah. We're going upstate. So they go upstate New York to a small town. And they're going to collect money from a guy who owns a pizzeria. They get upstate. It's now late and the pizzeria is closed. So Luigi says, what's going on? The place is closed. He says, "No worry, you come with me." They go into the pizzeria. They break in, and Laporta disassembles all of the gas lines in the pizzeria. Okay. And then they leave, and they do nothing. He says, "Get in the car." They drive a block or two away, still having the sight line of the pizzeria. At a particular moment, Laporta gets out of his car, and this is how long ago it was. He goes to a payphone, and he makes a call to the pizzeria. He gets back in the car, and he says, "You watch."
And then the sparks in the line makes it blow up.
Exactly. The place exploded. Yeah. Got back into the car, drove back to Brooklyn. So that was how Luigi kind of got in good with the guys on Knickerbocker Avenue. Yeah. And there's one more thing that he does before he becomes a hitman in Brooklyn. Licata owned and ran a illegal casino on the second floor of the place where underneath the above, I should say, I'm sorry, the social club that he owned.
It was kind of a baccarat room, right? It seems like
baccarat, blackjack. It was that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So one day, Luigi's in the club, and Licata says to him, look, he hears that the dealer who was supposed to work there that night was either sick or didn't make it. So Luigi says, "I got to take my shot." He goes up to DeQuana and he says to DeQuana, "I can do this." DeQuana takes him to Licata. He says, "I can do this." Now, Licata had trusted him and knew that. And the other thing about Luigi, he was a big gambler, which is one of his problems.
Yeah.
And Licata says, "I'll give you a shot." Go upstairs, and he starts dealing. And he's doing well. He's taking care. Everything's fine. He tells me it's a blackjack table. He tells me, "Mike, at the table are 4 guys, all made guys. One of them was a capo." And he hears them talking about one of their friends who was also a made guy, and that the guy has to be killed. Why? Because that particular individual was pimping out a young widow of a guy who lived in the neighborhood. The guy died. The widow was good looking, young. And this guy, this one of the Bonanno guys grabbed her and now was pimping her out to anybody and everyone. And the family gets wind of it. And they go to the Bonannos, and they say, "Listen, this is what this guy did." They say he has to go, but none of them wanted to kill him because he was their friend.
Yeah.
Luigi says, I'll do it.
Oh, shit.
And he does the same thing as he'd done before. He stalked them, surveilled them, and he gets him in front as he's getting into his car one morning on the way to wherever he was going. He says, "I put a shot right in his head. He went down. I made sure he was dead. I get in my car." And this is the other thing he does after every hit in New York and in Jersey, because there is a Jersey one. He drives to Atlantic City, and he stays in Atlantic City 4 or 5 days till the heat calms down. He comes back. That is the beginning. That is the beginning of Luigi's, career as the hitman.
Tell us about the Jersey one. I didn't know about that one.
Okay, this one will, I'm telling you that when you hear it, you probably won't believe it, but it's true. Luigi one day gets a call from, I guess it was Daquana. Yeah, Daquana.
Yeah.
He says, come to Knickerbocker Avenue. And he gets there. It's summertime. And look, Daquana's sitting outside the club, and he calls him over, and he tells him that he's got a job for him. He says, okay, tell me about it. So Daquana came from Sicily. A friend of his who he grew up with in Sicily came to the United States at the same time and moved and went to Jersey, where Daquana went to Brooklyn. The guy in Jersey becomes a cop in Newark. He's a Newark police officer. And the Newark police officer has a sister, good-looking sister, married to a businessman who has who works in Newark. I don't remember if he was in real estate or finance or whatever, but he was a gambler. And he participated in a weekly game in addition to other gambling places. He participated in a weekly card game with friends of his. He wasn't a good gambler, by the way, and he was losing. He always lost. One particular night, the pot is growing, and I call him the brother-in-law of the cop. He is the brother-in-law of the cop, has this great hand. The problem is he doesn't have enough money to stay in the pot. So he puts his wife up as the ante. And he loses. The deal was he had to take the other guys in the game home with him that night. And for the entire night, they raped his wife, entire evening until the morning. When she gets up after this, when they all leave, she calls her brother, the cop, and the guy's crazed. He knows what he needs to do. He needs to kill his brother-in-law. He doesn't, in my opinion, didn't want to use the DeCavalcanti family because at that time they were under suspicion for being wired. They were on wires and everything. Not only that, I think the cop felt, well, I'm in Jersey. I don't want to owe these guys anything. They'll come to me all the time. So he goes to his friend Daquana in Brooklyn.
Oh, shit.
He tells him the story. Daquana says, you don't need to say anything more. I'll take care of it. And he tells Luigi the story. And Luigi now says to me, this is a guy who deserves to be killed. This is a bad person. He does the exact same thing, Tom. He surveils him. He lived on the outskirts of Newark. I forgot where, but it was a leafy area. It was kind of the suburbs.
Yeah.
Now this house, he knew what he did every day. Comes out. He knew the time he left to go to work. He actually was going to do it in Newark because he thought maybe on a Saturday he worked on Saturdays, this guy as well, and it was quieter, but he said too many people around. So what he did was he waited for it was a Friday morning, and it was in the summertime. He knew the guy was coming out of the house. He comes out out of his house, down the steps, and he says to me, Mike, but he's not dressed like he's going to work. He's got a fishing pole. He's got a box. He's going fishing. Luigi was parked across the street, and he waited until he started to put the fishing equipment into the car. He stood up, and he tells me from across the street, he says, I shoot him. I get him right in the head. Boom, he goes down. I said, you shot him once? One shot? You got him and he killed? He goes, I'm a good shot. He says, yes, one shot. Dead. What'd you do next? I got into the car, and he had to figure this out beforehand. He figured the route to the Garden State Parkway from where he was so that he could get on the
22
Yep, all the way down to Atlantic City. And at that point, gambling was already had become legal in Atlantic City. So he was in his element. There was gambling. There were women. That was another thing about him that was a problem. He was a big womanizer, and he was a drinker. So that's the Jersey, the Jersey hit. And when I tell that story to people, when I told it to my colleagues in the DA's office back when he was an informant for me, they didn't believe it. They said, that's insane. That's what he did. And the reason that I had, so let me tell you the story about how I get him.
Yeah, I was going to say.
So he is a successful hitman. And the Gambinos are also now using him to do some work. There is a restaurant in Bensonhurst called New Corner Restaurant. It's a really good Italian restaurant.
Yeah.
The chef in the restaurant was raping his niece, his young niece.
His own niece?
His own niece. And the family finds out about it. Not the family, the Gambinos, the family of the young girl. They go to the Gambinos and they tell them that what happened and they need him hit. They get a guy first to do this. Another guy, not Luigi.
Yeah.
The guy does whatever he has to do. The day he's going to kill the chef, he pulls up to the restaurant and there are all these police cars outside. The place was a very popular place for cops to eat.
Oh, Jesus.
So he says, forget it. He gives it up. He doesn't do it.
Yeah.
He just says, I'm not doing it. So one of the Gambinos, the guy that knew Luigi from another kind of business, like the drug business.
Can you disclose who that is or no?
What's that?
Can you disclose who the Gambino guy was?
Do I do it? Yeah, the guy's name was Mirable. Mirable was his name.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So he calls him, gets Luigi to come, gives him the deal, and Luigi once again is absolutely. Mm-hmm. So he has to figure out how this guy operates when time he comes to work, and he surveils the place. And the guy worked, and there was an entrance to the kitchen around the corner from where the main entrance to the restaurant was. So for Luigi, it was perfect. He goes to the restaurant by himself one day, and he walks into the kitchen, and he asks for Enzo. That was the guy's nickname. Says, Enzo, he here? And no, Enzo's in Sicily. He says, no, he's not here. So Luigi tells me that he goes back several times. Enzo was still in Italy or Sicily. He's also called the place a few times, and they always tell him Enzo is in Sicily. Once he calls and they say he stayed longer because his mother died in Sicily, so he didn't come back soon. Fine, Luigi doesn't give up. He finally calls one day, and they say, yeah, Enzo is here. He's back. He's here. So Luigi now has to get the young girl, because he doesn't know what the guy looks like. Yeah. Mirable and the young girl and he drive to the restaurant and park outside the entrance to the kitchen, this side entrance, and wait for the guy to come to work, because he was told that he comes at like 4:00.
Yeah.
The guy comes walking down the block. The young girl points him out. That's him. They take her home. Mirable gives Luigi a gun and drives him home. Later that night, they come back to the restaurant. I guess there was still, I don't remember if the service, the cooking service was over, but he walks into the back just like he had done before. Enzo, he here? Guy says to him, yeah, Enzo, he's over there. So he walks over to this guy. He says, are you Enzo? And he says, yeah, I'm Enzo. Shoots him right in the head, right in the kitchen. Puts another one into his head. Walks out, gets into the car, gives the gun to Mirable and tells Mirable, drive me to my car, because he's driving to Atlantic City, and get rid of the gun. Mm. We find out through him later that Mirable never gets rid of the gun. He gave it and used it some other time. And luckily for Luigi, it never, turned up to be connected to the murder in the New Corners.
Interesting.
So the only way, Tom, that the New Corners restaurant case gets solved is because Luigi turns himself in as a result of a real big financial, international criminal genius who wants to hire him to take care of two problems. The guy's name is Michele Sindona.
Oh, come on.
And Sindona.
Hold on. This is where, okay, I know Michele Sindona was, really quick, Michael. I know He was Sicilian. I know he had a link to the Gambinos, but he's like Lee Iacocca. Well, how the
Correct.
hell does he get hooked up with Luigi?
Okay, I'll tell you how. So you know the background. Sindona has taken over banks in Italy and has caused them to fall, and to close up. He becomes the mob's money launderer, and he takes money and the mob and the place that really kind of is very interesting about this is that he does one of these. He takes over a bank in Venice at one time.
Yes.
And the cardinal, because he had been involved with the Vatican also.
Him and Roberto Calvi, God's bankers.
The guy, so he causes this bank in Venice to collapse.
Yeah.
All these people lost their money. The cardinal never forgot it. And it turns out that the cardinal becomes Pope John Paul I.
Right.
Pope Paul, who was the Pope before Pope John Paul, loved Sindona and gave him the carte blanche to do whatever he did. Yeah. He lost millions of dollars for the Vatican.
Yeah.
And that was important because when John Paul came in, he knew what was happening and how Paul was letting him do whatever he wanted. And the mob knew that John Paul was not going to stand for it anymore, and that he was going to crack down, which is what led to them killing him. And they poisoned them. And I talked to the guy, believe it or not, who's not involved with Luigi.
Anthony Raimondi. If you say Anthony Raimondi, I'm getting off. Have you heard of that character?
I certainly have.
He claims he was involved.
Well, his cousin was one of the cardinals who was involved in the Vatican Bank. So,
really? So maybe there's some truth to it.
Wow. Marcinkus was his cousin. Yes, that's why I believe him.
Okay,
So let me just finish.
My mind's blown, but it's gonna pop off my head soon. Keep going.
So now Sindona comes to the United States, and he causes the collapse of a bank on Long Island called the Franklin National Bank.
Yes, Franklin National. That's correct.
Right. So ultimately, I'll skip ahead. Ultimately, the Feds, Southern District in New York, Lower Manhattan, they indict him for the Franklin National Bank. The bank collapses in Italy. He gets indicted in Italy. Yeah. So he's wanted now in Italy, but he's in the United States. And the Italian authorities want to extradite him, but the American authorities want to prosecute him as well. So he has only one way out, according to himself and according to what Luigi tells me, and that is, I've got to kill the prosecutor in Manhattan, and because they'll have to reassign it to someone else. It'll take them a year or more to get up to snuff, and I'll be out of the country by then. I'll be gone, and I have to have the prosecutor/judge in Italy killed because. All right, so he goes to the Gambinos. He goes to Mirabile. And who does Mirabile bring in? Luigi. Sits him down, says, we're going to meet somebody.
This is like in Yankee A-level, bottom of the ninth. Yep. I need, Derek Jeter up. And the other thing, real quick, just to give some context and backstory, is Miguel Sindona managed money for the P2 Masonry, the Vatican Bank, and of course, Sicilian Cosa Nostra, right? He was a powerhouse. When he lost all that money, and it's a little debatable, but some people believe, he lost money and filtered to the mafia. Other people believe he lost everybody's money. So Giovanni Gambino. Well, first of all, they said he was kidnapped, but they hid him out in Staten Island of all places, and it was under the stewardship of the Gambino brothers, which, as you know, was a powerhouse. So it blows my mind. I cover the business end of the mob. And so if this was a business, they outsourced a very important piece of the business to like a third-party vendor who should not be used.
Well, it was Luigi's downfall, but it was also Sindona's downfall as well, because when he sits down with Luigi and he talks about him, tells him what he wants,
Yeah.
What he wants him to do, he tells him, you get $100,000 for the prosecutor and kill him.
Yeah.
And when you kill him, I want you to plant drugs in his pocket so that it won't come back to me.
Yeah.
And then you go to Italy, $100,000 to kill the prosecutor / judge in Italy. Luigi says to me, Mike, he says, I knew that if I kill a prosecutor in the United States, I'm done.
Yeah.
My life is over. So he tells Sindona no, turns him down, says, I'm not doing it. Wow. Sindona tried to get someone else. He never was successful in doing this, and ultimately gets convicted in New York, gets convicted in Italy, does time in Italy, and he gets poisoned in Italy.
Yeah, that wasn't suicide. That espresso, the hot espresso that he drank, that wasn't suicide.
So Luigi now is feeling that he did in his mind the right thing, but he knows that it's not going to be thought of very well by the wise guys. So he knows, and he's also now stuck. He's got to make money. So his friends come up with this robbery scheme. There's a courier, a money courier, who picks up money every day, every week at the same location, and it's usually about $30,000 to $40,000.
A lot of money back then.
It's in Queens.
Yeah.
So they stake out the guy, and here he is, walking out of wherever he walked out of with the bag in his hand. Luigi says to me, except Mike, it was not a man. It's a lady.
Oh.
He says, they want me to rob a lady. I don't do that. I can't do that. Nobody in Sicily will rob a lady. Yeah. But I'm stuck. I need the money.
Yeah.
So he takes the money from her, and shortly thereafter, the cops, he drives back home to where this guy lived, the guy who was in charge of setting up this whole thing, and the police must have followed because they swarm in, arrest Luigi, arrest the other guys, and Luigi now is being held in the Queens County Jail on $500 bail. Okay,
Christ.
He can't make it, Tom. He can't make the bail. So you know what the guy does, and I still can't believe that he did this. He calls Sindona, and he says to Sindona, you got to get me out. He says, I can't go on trial. I can't be on the stand, and it's good for you if you get me out.
Yeah. So
Sindona basically tells him, essentially, no, doesn't give him the money. He goes, Luigi, and so that he says to me, that tells me that I'm marked. I'm going to die if I don't get out of jail. He says, I know that was going to happen. He ultimately goes to his brother-in-law. His brother-in-law puts up the $500. He gets out, goes home, and calls Sindona again and says to Sindona, you turned me down once. I have a lot to say. I want $30,000. I'm going to get out of the country. You'll never see me again. Yeah. Sindona tells him no. You know what he does? Walks into the 9th precinct in Manhattan.
Come on.
To the desk, and he says to the desk officer, I want to talk to the FBI. And that's how he turns himself in. And the FBI picks him up. They hold him they debrief him totally.
Yeah.
They find out about the Brooklyn murder, the New Corners, and they knew it's open. He told them everything else about Sindona and all of the other stuff. Now they have, what are we going to do with this guy? We got everything out of him. So they bring him to Brooklyn to the cops. And the detectives don't know what to do with him. So what do? They march him into the DA's office, and they say, he's an informant. He's got an open homicide. Here he is. I'm working that day. I'm in the homicide bureau. I was the senior trial assistant. My boss calls me into his office, and he says, these 2 detectives brought in this Italian guy. He's blah, blah, blah. He says, you're Italian. He's Italian. He's yours. That's how I got Luigi Ronsisvalle. And you know how the relationship that we developed was amazing, to tell you the truth. And so he brings him into my office. They bring him actually, I had him in a conference room. And I look at him and I say to myself, this guy is a hitman. He's like 5'6". He's as wide. Yeah, there he is. And I say, how is this guy a hitman? Because my whole idea of a hitman was somebody sophisticated, etc. So he sits down, and I say to him, you hungry? He goes, yes. He said he's in the Brooklyn House of Detention now.
Yeah.
He says they just only med. That's what I get, which is crap, So I said, okay, what do you want? He says, I want a veal cutlet Parmesan Hero and a bottle of beer. Tom, I get it for him. Every time he comes in from then on until the time he ultimately pleads guilty and goes away, he had the veal Parmesan and the beer, and he tells me everything.
Wow.
Actually, I shouldn't say that. He told me everything except he held something back. And I always knew that he was holding something back. I always felt that. But I had what I needed. I had everything that I needed. I had turned him over actually to our squad, and they were doing an investigation into the Bananas on Knickerbocker Avenue. He helped them.
Yeah.
And Carmine Galante gets killed. Knickerbocker Avenue. He gives them the information that he knows about. He says, I'm in jail. I don't know precisely, but if they ask him, if you had to guess, who do you think killed him? He names the two guys, Baldo Amato and Cesar Bonventuri. Those are the two guys who killed him, who killed Galante.
Amazing.
So he established a relationship with one particular detective. He gave him all this information. Ultimately, make a long story short, he goes to federal prison in Sandstone, Minnesota. He gets off the plane, and this is like he's on the moon. I mean, this is like he's from Sicily to Brooklyn to, now Sandstone, Minnesota. So while he's in jail, he's doing 4 to 8, I think he got, because we allowed him to plead guilty to manslaughter as opposed to murder because he helped us, etc.
Yeah.
While he's in jail, he talked to his lawyer all the time. The lawyer tells him that about the president's commission on organized crime, and that the next session is going to be about drug dealing and the mob.
Interesting.
Luigi thought he died and went to heaven. That was what he was holding back, Tom. He was in the middle. First of all, he was a part of the French connection, but that was not pertinent at that point. He was in the center of the pizza connection.
I was going to say, Pietro Fano. Yeah.
He was there. So he contacts the detective. Detective brings him back, debriefs him, brings him to another detective friend of ours who's working for the president's commission, and he winds up testifying in Miami Beach about the pizza connection.
Oh my God.
Louis Free, who was a prosecutor in the Southern District at that point.
We just talked about Louis Free, who was the
head of the FBI
at one point, yeah.
And Rudy Giuliani, who was the U.S. attorney,
yes,
were in the midst of the pizza connection trial. They were about to begin the trial. They had indicted all of these Bonanno guys, including a guy named Catalano who took over for Licata. Licata didn't want anything to do with drugs, so they said, well, you know what? Then you can't live. They killed him, and Catalano took over. And Luigi became the star witness in the pizza connection trial. So let me just tell you one, and I know you're running out of time. Let me just tell you one.
It's an open forum. We have time. The baby's crying anyway, so keep going.
Let me just tell you one little story about Luigi in terms of the pizza connection. He didn't know anything about transporting drugs. He knew only to bring drugs from Knickerbocker Avenue for the Buonanos to Bensonhurst to the Gambinos. And that was the French connection drugs. When that dried up, he had to go about his business and do other things. He did this big diamond district robbery. Very, very big deal. And it almost cost him his life. But one day, he's another guy who has now become part of his group, a guy named Felice Puma.
Yeah.
They were working together. And Puma says to him, we're back in business, essentially. The pipeline is back. And what it was the pizza connection pipeline.
Correct.
So all of these drugs are coming in through the pizza stores. And, Galante and Bonanno had set up a lot of pizzerias.
Correct.
On the East Coast, in the Midwest, et cetera, so that they would be able to be the recipients of the drugs.
Yeah.
So he says that you need to bring this, I can't even tell you how much heroin, from Brooklyn to Los Angeles. There's a guy in Los Angeles who is going to be our distributor out there, and you got to bring it. So what did they tell him to do? Tell him to buy a suit 2 sizes or 3 sizes too big. and he wears it. They stuff all of the pockets and everything that they could possibly find with packets of heroin. And they tell him, when you go to the airport, you wait and you wait and you wait until just about the time the doors are closing for your flight, and you run up to the gate and say, I'm sorry with the ticket, and you get onto the plane. Now, this is even before 9/11 and before all kinds of, the metal detectors, etc. They tell them, when you're on a plane, you do not take your jacket off and you do not fall asleep. No way can you sleep. He says, I said, so what happened? Goes all the way to Los Angeles, gets off the plane, meets the guy, parties with him for 3 days, gets back on the plane, comes to He made that trip about 7 times. Wow. He also had to do the same thing to Chicago, except Chicago, no plane.
Drove, yeah.
It was a train. He did it with a train, and he carried this big suitcase. And they told him, when you get on the train, don't put it in the overhead. You got to keep it between your legs. Yeah. So what happened in Chicago? He gets out of Union Station. There's a guy that meets him, pretends to be a cab driver. You need a cab? Yes, sir. Gets in the back of the cab, drive around a corner. Luigi gets out, leaves the drugs, and he goes back into Union Station, goes back to back home. So he knew all of the distribution routes. He knew all of the, the players. And he also knew that when they brought the drugs back to Knickerbocker Avenue, the guy that took control of them was this guy, Salvatore Catalano. And Catalano was the #1 defendant in a Pizza Connection situation. So,
wow,
it became very, 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 very important to Giuliani's case. And read the book, because after they put him in witness protection. He hates it. He's got to make money, and he says to Catalano's lawyer, I'll say that I lied, and so
I already downloaded on Audible. Terrific, that's why I was on my phone earlier.
That picture you put up of him with the 2 people, the guy on the right, my right anyway, the tall guy, is Salvatore Catalano's lawyer. And that is a conference they were having in Cincinnati, Ohio, in a motel room, where Luigi said, I'll say I lied at the trial if Catalano pays me money. So he did. He went in and he recanted. And then he recanted the recantation. And it's a phenomenal story. And ultimately, I think that I had heard, when I first was doing this research, that he had killed himself in jail. Turns out that Joe Pistone testified at that trial. Joe Pistone, as you will know, is Donnie Brasco. For those of you listeners who know the whole story of Donnie Brasco, Pistone and he were witnesses in the Pizza Connection case, and he got to know Luigi. And he writes in a book, which is part of my research. I read it, and he said that he killed him. He killed himself. I thought he didn't kill him. I thought he died. And but Pistone says that he couldn't handle it. He couldn't handle witness protection. He just couldn't live that way, and he wound up ending it by killing himself. So
him, Pistone, and Buscetta were the 3 major informants or witnesses on that case.
Correct.
For the Pizza Connection. Can I share a little bit of a tinfoil hat theory with you, Michael? Because
sure.
This may agree, or this may fall under a little tinfoil hat. Okay, so Badalamenti got shunned by Riena and those guys. He screwed it over to Brazil. He set up his own pipeline. I had an informant on who was from Sicily, Frank Fiorellino. He says Badalamenti wasn't a dope guy. He did that to survive and kind of build back up to get back at the Corleoneschi. But we could push and pull on that part. But anyway,
doesn't surprise me if that's what he said. Yeah.
And so with that being said, he sourced his drugs from the Mujahideen, Afghanis, which at the time were our friends, right? You're battling the Russians.
Correct.
You need money. Ready for the tinfoil hat. I think the CIA was like, "Hey, mobsters, you need, you can't get them from Rena and those guys. You can't go to the Gambinos because, we have this for you out of the Mujahideen. The Mujahideen gets the money. What do? They buy arms, right? Russian mob, CIA, wherever you name it, right? The second the Mujahideen kind of says, all right, Russians, you go.
You're gone.
And then turns those same weapons on us in the U.S.
Precisely.
All right, we're going to shut you down. Oh, by the way, who's your customer? Those Sicilian guys. 2 calls to the DOJ, and then boom, pizza connection case exists. Because if you're doing $1.7 billion in 10 years, why in the 11th year they get pinched? And I think Sedona, I'm super shocked. I'm almost at a point. I'm going to post this and watch this again because I don't believe it. Sedona was institutional power. Why the hell was he sitting with, respectfully, not to knock your subject, but a schlub associate of the Gambino Bonanno family? I am shocked by that, Michael.
Well, he was in New York. See, that's the thing. And who did he work for? He worked for the Gambinos.
Yeah.
He wanted 2 people killed.
Yeah.
I told you how successful Luigi was, and he had done work for the Gambinos. So that's what they gave him the job,
Now, again, I kind of look at like the organizational structure, the machinations of how they do things, the business end of things. Should they just give him his button? Because maybe if they gave him his button, he doesn't roll. Did you ever kind of ask him that, or did you ever?
I certainly did. I certainly did, and that is the answer. If he had been made, and he had gotten made, he wasn't rolling. The only reason that he did is they disrespected him. That was a big thing because they didn't make him.
Yeah.
And then he's got the Sedona problem because he turns him down.
Yeah.
Because he's pissed off at the mob, and now he thinks he's going to get killed. Let me just give you one other thing, and this comes into this discussion. I told you that between the French connection and the pizza connection, he needed to make money.
Correct.
There was a diamond robbery. He set it up with another guy, along with some Gambino people and Bonanno people. It was a joint effort. But he and his buddy were the two people who went into the diamond, the dealer on 47th Street in Manhattan.
By the way, that isn't heard of. I think it was the first and last time that only happened.
Yeah, and they do it. They steal $1 million worth of diamonds. Here's what he tells me. He said what he had to do was now leave the place. He had to walk across town to the east side of Manhattan, where a guy was waiting for him. So he would hand the diamonds off to that guy. He then went to Chicago, Luigi. Okay. Yeah. Think about this, Tom. It's a robbery in Midtown Manhattan. And this guy, who certainly doesn't look like he belongs in the middle of Manhattan, is able to get all the way across town and drop the diamonds off into the hands of somebody who takes it and hands it to a fence whose name is Enzo Napoli. And Enzo Napoli was a guy who was who had been investigated by another detective friend of mine. He was the liaison between the Sicilian Mafia and the American Mafia. Okay.
Oh, sure.
So he goes to Chicago. Luigi says, I check into the hotel they tell me to check into. And I get a room. I have a room. And he's a drinker and he's a ladies' man. He's down at the bar and he meets a woman. The woman is an older woman, and she gets the discussion. Why are you here? Where are you doing? What are you doing? What's your room? He tells her where the room is. She says, you know what? I have a daughter who's about your age. I would like you to meet her. And we have a suite upstairs. Why don't you just leave your room? You can come to live with us in the suite until you're here. He says, this is great. He said he died and went to heaven, right? Packs up his stuff, goes up, and he stays with this woman. That night, a hit team from Brooklyn comes to the hotel.
And goes to the empty room.
Asks the desk clerk where was he staying. She takes him up to the room. They open up the door and they shoot the whole place up. Luigi is not there. He's upstairs in the suite with the old lady. He finds this out the next day. And he now realizes what had happened. And who was behind it? Enzo Napoli, because he never got along with him. So now he comes back to New York. I'll skip that. He comes back to New York, sits down, and he says to me, Mike, they never even give me my share of the diamonds. It's weeks now, weeks. They want to kill me. So there's a big sit down in a closed restaurant in Midtown Manhattan. There's a guy, Enzo Napoli's there with the diamonds. These other people, someone from the Bananos, someone from the Gambinos, and they're divvying up all these diamonds. Nobody is pushing any towards Luigi. He says they tell me that they're going to give me $30,000, me and my friend. He says, do you believe this? $1 million diamonds? 30,000. That's what I was going to get. And not diamonds. You're going to give me money. He said, Mike, but at the end, when they give you all these diamonds out, he says, some lawyer even got it. Some lawyer for the family got some diamonds. There's one big diamond left. He thinks, oh, okay, well, that's going to be mine. He says, Enzo Napoli looks up behind where Luigi was sitting, and someone comes into the restaurant, sits down. I said, who was it? He said it was Paul Castellano. Oh, he sits at the table. They give Castellano the diamond. He says, thank you. I said, what happens next? He says he gets up and he leaves. He says, I'm basically left with nothing, $30,000. He says, I want to kill this guy Napoli, but I can't because he couldn't do it. He didn't get permission, and he says, if I don't get the permission, I don't do it.
I assume Enzo was a made guy, right?
What's that?
I assume Enzo was made.
Enzo Napoli was a made guy. Yeah. So add all of these things up. That the Sindona thing not being made. He finally decided that he couldn't take it any longer. And one other thing about him, when he turned himself in, the FBI took him to a motel in Westchester to debrief him.
Yeah.
His wife and kids went to another place. And he gets a call that night from his wife. And she says, the agents are gone. There's no one here. Apparently, the agents left her in wherever they put her. Luigi went nuts. He told me I almost killed the agent who I was with. So they fixed that. 2 nights later, he's in his room. He gets a knock on the door. He opens the door, and there are 2 guys. He describes them to me. 2 guys in suits. They just stare at me and look at me, and he says, I know who they are. And I closed the door, and I went and I said to the FBI, you got to get me out of here. He knew that these were guys. They were scoping him out. They were going to come back and they were going to kill him. And the FBI finally took him and put him somewhere else before they brought him to the DA's office. So
this wasn't like the 60s. This is like the 80s, 90s. Like where?
Yeah, this is. He comes to me in around 79.
Oh, okay, so it's still a little.
Yeah.
Not that it's an excuse, but I get it. I thought it was maybe 80s, late 80s and 90s. All right, so.
So okay. I hope that I haven't given away too much to your readers, to your listeners, I want you to buy that book. Now. I think you'll love it. I
need to listen to this because it's the details of how this strings together. So everybody, I'm going to put a link below to the Amazon link. I'll put an Audible link too. If you have Audible, I'll download it.
Yeah, actually, the book is on Amazon and is there's an audio book on Amazon as well as Barnes & Noble.
Yeah.
And another link, another place called Tantor.com. Tantor Media was the company that is behind the audiobook. So
perfect. And then
I haven't listened to it yet. So I'm interested to hear what the actor who reads the book sounds like, because to tell you the truth, my book agent wanted me to do it, but Tantor said that we have professionals to do this. And
it's so I wrote a book and I did an audio version, and just number one, this is what they do. And it's like an 8-hour, like minimum, like 8-10 hours, and like days. And like you want to read your own book, but it's like it's not as fun as it sounds. So probably a smart move by your publisher for that. One final question, and then we'll go into how people could find you to check you out aside for the book. You are an intelligent guy. You're a successful guy. You a lawyer, Brooklyn guy, Italian guy. You grew up probably indirectly around the mob, right? You know the mob. You're not an idiot, right?
Correct.
But when you kind of sat down with Luigi and the stuff you're telling me is stuff that I just learned. You're like, did you always know? Okay, so let me reframe. The mob, in your opinion, growing up, and the mob that you knew externally, what did you think? And then when you heard Luigi and all the fuckery that goes on, did he confirm how you knew these guys were shitheads, or did you maybe hold these guys to a higher regard? And then when you saw behind the curtain, you're like, these guys aren't too swift.
No, it's the latter. It's that he told me and showed me and talked to me about what shitheads they were, as you said.
Yeah.
Let me tell you how close I was, and I didn't even realize this until I did the case.
Yeah.
Go back to Eppolito and Caracappa.
Yeah.
Eppolito had his father was a wise guy, a made guy in the Gambino family.
Yeah.
He had his two uncles were also an uncle and two brothers were also wise guys, right? Yeah. So I'm sorry, not two brothers, two uncles. So his father and two uncles.
Got it.
Yeah. When I was growing up in Brooklyn, my mother and my aunt were very, religious. They were part of a religious group in the Catholic church near us. Nice. And they had a friend who was in this group as well. Her name was Ray Ippolito. Ooh. Okay. And I recall my mother and my aunt and my father and my uncle talking one time about how this guy, Ray Ippolito's husband, was, he was not, his brothers were in the mob. He was not, and he changed his name because he knew that the Ippolito's father and brother were bad guys. I mean, they were they were made men.
They were D Cavalcante guys, Ippolitos, I think. Yeah.
And so this guy, Ippolito, changed his name. And I didn't realize that until now. I get this case, 30 years later, I'm involved, and I say, oh my God.
Wow.
This is Ray Ippolito's husband's, nephew. And he's involved and didn't want to be involved. He was a straight guy, Tom. He was not a wise guy at all, And then, we also had, my grandmother had, cousins or people who were taking numbers and doing stuff like that. So yeah, I did know. And look, you can't help but being kind of the mob being in your head, and the idea of it coming from movies like The Godfather, and then, and The Godfather is not necessarily the one that I would point to, because someone asked me this question: which movie was closer to what and really Donnie Brasco, because there were more people who were on the balls of their ass, so to speak, with no money, breaking into parking meters and doing stuff. You can't believe the crap that these guys would get into to make money. And so I think that's a long answer to your question, but that's the answer that I have.
All right. So Michael, again, we'll put links for everything below. We have an iTunes component for those listening, driving in a car. Hopefully, if they've been listening this whole time. How can people find you, Michael?
Well, I don't have a website, but they can find me on Facebook, on Instagram, and right now. But I'm setting up a website, so I'll have that. But right now, Facebook and Instagram at the beginning, and I just encourage them. And I know this is an out and out ad. Yeah. Read the book. I think you'll really love it.
Oh, no, I'm getting pickier on who I have on, especially author wise. Don Capria wrote the Columbo book, fantastic book. Just recently had Anthony DeStefano on. So you're in good company here, and you're in a class act, Italian American author I'm always going to support. And I got to be honest, I'm so blown away. Like I have you'll see I have 5 in my library. I'm just gonna skip to the head of the class, and I'm gonna get in the book right away. Please support Michael Vecchione. Please check out this book. Drop a link below and say, hey, I bought the books. You want to show that we supported Michael. And Michael, listen, I had high expectations going into this. I'm blown away. I had 45 minutes, an hour set up. I'm happy that we went over. And Michael, thank you so much for being on Mobsters Inc., my friend.
Thank you very much for having me. And hopefully I'll be back one of these days.
Oh, you will be very soon, my friend. Have a good one, Michael. Thank you.
Take care. Good night, Tom. Thank you.